I used to believe little kids imagined monsters because the real world hadn't frightened them yet. Then I watched a 7-year-old girl stop one powerful man from taking a single bite of birthday cake, and I realized sometimes children notice the danger every adult is too distracted to see. 15 minutes before anyone in that ballroom forgot how to breathe, I was balancing a silver tray loaded with sparkling water glasses while silently reminding myself not to trip. The Crystal Ballroom at the Grand Lexington Hotel was the kind of place that made ordinary people like me feel as though we had wandered into someone else's dream. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors. A string quartet floated gentle music through conversations about investment portfolios, private islands, and vacation homes. Every designer gown shimmered. Every tailored tuxedo fit perfectly. Every smile looked expensive. My name is Emily Carter, and none of that world belonged to me. I was 26 years old, working 3 jobs, raising my 7-year-old daughter alone, and calculating grocery prices in my head while carrying champagne that cost more than my monthly electric bill. Lily wasn't supposed to be with me tonight, but my regular babysitter had called an hour before my shift with the flu, and saying no to this catering job meant falling behind on rent. My manager finally agreed to let Lily stay quietly in the employee lounge as long as she didn't bother anyone. She promised she would read her favorite mystery book until I finished. That promise lasted exactly 42 minutes. "Mom," her tiny voice whispered behind me. I turned and found Lily standing near the ballroom entrance wearing her blue cardigan, her light blonde curls slightly messy, clutching her stuffed rabbit beneath one arm. "You were supposed to stay in the lounge," I whispered back. She lowered her eyes. "I got thirsty." I sighed, unable to stay frustrated for long. Lily had the kind of face that made anger dissolve before it fully arrived. I handed her a bottled water from my serving station. "Drink this, then go right back." "Deal." She nodded obediently, but instead of leaving. Immediately, her curious green eyes wandered across the ballroom. Lily noticed everything. She remembered license plate numbers after seeing them once. She recognized birds by their songs. She could tell when I smiled, even though I wanted to cry. It was one of the reasons I worried about her so much. Sensitive children often carried burdens they never deserved. A ripple moved through the room. Conversations softened almost instantly. Guests subtly stepped aside without anyone asking them to. I followed every other server's gaze toward the grand entrance. Vincent DeLuca had arrived. Even before I knew his name, I understood his presence. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He didn't need to be. Around 6'3", dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, with dark hair brushed neatly back and calm gray eyes that seemed to measure every detail around him. He walked with quiet confidence instead of performance. The people surrounding him smiled politely, but there was something deeper beneath those smiles. Respect, caution, curiosity. The birthday celebration everyone had gathered for suddenly felt secondary to the man himself. I looked away before he noticed me. Wealthy men existed in a different universe from exhausted single mothers carrying serving trays. But Lily kept staring, not at him, but somewhere beyond him. Her small fingers tightened around the rabbit's ear. A crease formed between her eyebrows. It was the same expression she wore whenever she solved one of her mystery puzzles before reaching the last page. My stomach tightened for reasons I could not explain. Lily was not looking at Vincent anymore. She was watching one of the catering staff standing beside the enormous 5-tier birthday cake displayed beneath a circle of soft golden lights. It was breathtaking, covered in white sugar flowers so realistic they looked freshly picked that morning. Guests wandered over to admire it, smiling as they took pictures before the celebration officially began. I almost laughed at myself for feeling nervous over a cake. Then I noticed Lily had stopped blinking. She rarely stared that long unless something genuinely puzzled her. "Mom," she whispered, tugging gently on my sleeve. "Do you know her?" I followed the direction of her finger. A woman in a pristine white pastry jacket stood near the dessert table, adjusting tiny decorations around the cake. Everything about her appeared completely normal. She smiled politely whenever guests walked by. She nodded at another chef carrying dessert plates toward the kitchen. There was nothing unusual about her at all. "No," I answered quietly. "She works with the bakery." Lily did not respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the woman. Children often notice details adults ignored, but I had worked enough events to know that catering teams constantly moved around cakes before presentations. "Come on," I said softly. Finish your water and head back to the lounge. She nodded without argument, yet her feet refused to move. Instead, she tilted her head ever so slightly, the way she did whenever she heard a distant sound no one else noticed. Then I saw it. The pastry chef glanced over both shoulders before leaning toward the cake. Her movement lasted no more than 2 seconds. One hand disappeared behind the tallest layer. When it came back into view, she slipped a tiny silver object into the pocket of her jacket before calmly straightening another sugar flower. It happened so quickly, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But Lily had seen every second. She squeezed my hand tighter. "Mom," she whispered again, her voice barely audible beneath the music. She changed something. I looked again. The woman had already walked away, greeting another server with an easy smile. Nothing seemed wrong. Around us, laughter continued. Glasses clinked softly. The string quartet transitioned into another elegant melody. Across the ballroom, Vincent DeLuca greeted guests with calm confidence, shaking hands and thanking people for attending. Security personnel remained nearby without drawing attention to themselves, blending naturally into the celebration. Everything looked perfectly controlled, perfectly safe. I forced myself to smile at Lily. Sometimes chefs make last-minute decorations. She slowly shook her head. No. Her answer came with unusual certainty. She looked scared. Those words settled heavily in my chest. I had learned never to dismiss Lily's instincts. Once she found my missing wallet inside a grocery cart no one else remembered using. Another time she insisted our apartment smelled strange hours before a small water heater leak filled the utility closet with steam. She noticed patterns, tiny changes, quiet emotions, things most adults rushed past without seeing. I crouched until we were eye level. "Sweetheart, are you sure?" She looked directly into my eyes. There was no excitement, no childish imagination, only worry. Then her gaze shifted past me again toward the enormous birthday cake waiting beneath the lights. Her face suddenly lost every trace of color. She inhaled sharply, clutched my arm with surprising strength, and before I could stop her, she pulled away from me and started running straight toward Vincent DeLuca. My heart nearly stopped as Lily slipped through the crowd before I could reach her. "Lily," I called, keeping my voice low enough not to disturb the guests but loud enough that she might hear me. She did not slow down. Tiny feet carried her between elegant tables and guests holding champagne glasses, her stuffed rabbit bouncing beneath one arm. Several people smiled, assuming she was simply an excited child at a birthday celebration. They had no idea she was running with a purpose. I hurried after her, apologizing every time I brushed past someone. My manager shot me a horrified look from across the ballroom, but there was no time to explain. Vincent DeLuca had just accepted the polished silver cake server from the event host. The photographer raised his camera. The string quartet softened into a gentle birthday melody. Every guest turned toward the magnificent cake. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Then Lily's clear little voice cut through the ballroom with startling urgency. "Do not eat it." The music seemed to disappear. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Hundreds of eyes turned toward one frightened little girl standing only a few feet from the birthday cake. She looked up at Vincent with tears beginning to fill her green eyes. "She put something in your cake," Lily said, pointing toward the pastry station. I saw her. For one endless second, nobody moved. I reached Lily and immediately wrapped both hands around her shoulders. "I am so sorry," I said, my face burning with embarrassment. "She is just a child. I am so sorry." Lily turned toward me, shaking her head desperately. "Mom, I am telling the truth." I wanted to comfort her, but every instinct told me to remove her from the center of the room as quickly as possible. Before I could lead her away, I noticed something unexpected. Vincent had not reacted with anger. He had not laughed. He had not dismissed her. Instead, he looked directly into Lily's eyes with complete attention, as though every other person in the ballroom had suddenly disappeared. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but there was a sharp focus behind those gray eyes that made the room feel strangely quiet. Without raising his voice, he spoke to one of the men standing nearby. "Please bring me the pastry chef responsible for the cake." The request was polite, controlled, yet everyone around him moved immediately. Two members of the catering staff looked at one another in visible confusion before hurrying toward the kitchen. My pulse pounded inside my ears. Guests began whispering behind their hands. Some looked irritated by the interruption. Others watched Lily with sympathy. Several parents instinctively drew their own children a little closer. Vincent lowered the cake server onto the table without touching the cake itself. Then he slowly crouched until he was almost at Lily's eye level. His expensive suit brushed lightly against the polished marble floor, but he did not seem to notice. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Lily," she answered, her small voice trembling now. "And what exactly did you see, Lily?" She swallowed before pointing again toward the towering white cake. The lady looked around first. Then she reached behind the flowers. She changed something. She was scared. No one laughed. No one smiled. Even I felt the tiny hairs on my arms rise. A few moments later, one of Vincent's associates returned, his expression noticeably different from before. He leaned close and quietly whispered something into Vincent's ear. I could not hear the words, but I watched Vincent's calm expression become even more still. Then his eyes lifted slowly toward me, and for the first time that evening I realized my daughter had not interrupted a birthday party. She had interrupted something far more important. The whispers spread through the ballroom faster than the music ever could. Guests who had been smiling only moments earlier now exchanged uncertain glances while pretending not to stare. My hands trembled around Lily's shoulders as I fought the overwhelming urge to scoop her into my arms and disappear through the nearest exit. I kept waiting for someone to tell us to leave, to accuse my daughter of ruining an important celebration, but the words never came. Vincent DeLuca remained exactly where he was, his attention fixed on Lily with the same quiet focus that had unsettled me from the moment he entered the ballroom. His associate stepped back after whispering into his ear, giving a nearly invisible nod. Vincent stood slowly and addressed the guests with calm confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the brief delay. Please enjoy refreshments while my staff confirms something." His tone carried no panic, no frustration, only quiet certainty. Remarkably, people listened without question. Conversations resumed in cautious voices as servers quickly redirected everyone toward another side of the ballroom with coffee and desserts that had not been part of the original presentation. Within moments, the birthday cake stood alone beneath the lights, untouched. I looked toward the pastry station. The woman Lily had pointed out was gone. Her workspace had been abandoned so completely that even her apron had disappeared. My stomach sank. Beside me, Lily tightened her grip on my hand. "She left," she whispered. Before I could answer, Vincent turned toward me. "Miss Carter." Hearing my last name from a complete stranger sent a chill through me. I had never introduced myself. I forced a polite smile that felt painfully unnatural. "Yes, sir. Would you and Lily come with me for a moment?" Every protective instinct inside me awakened at once. If Lily caused trouble, I sincerely apologize. She has a vivid imagination sometimes, and I should have kept her in the employee lounge. Lily looked up at me immediately. "Mom." I was not imagining. Her voice was small, but steady. Vincent glanced at her before returning his attention to me. I do not believe she was. The simple sentence caught me completely off guard. He gestured toward a quieter sitting area just beyond the ballroom, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, glowing beneath the evening sky. Two members of his security team remained several steps away, giving us more privacy than I expected. Vincent knelt once more until he and Lily were nearly eye level. "Lily," he said gently, "I would like you to tell me everything exactly the way you remember it. There are no wrong answers." She nodded slowly. The lady looked around before she touched the cake. She thought nobody was watching. Then she smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It looked scared. Vincent did not interrupt. "She took something out of her pocket?" he asked. Lily shook her head. "No. She put something back into her pocket after she touched the flowers." I watched his expression carefully. It barely changed, yet something in his eyes sharpened with every word. Finally, he asked the question that seemed to matter most. "How did you know something was wrong?" Lily looked confused by the question itself. "Because people do not look over both shoulders before decorating birthday cakes." Silence settled between them. I felt my breath catch. It was such a simple answer that I wondered why none of the adults, including me, had reached the same conclusion. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Vincent's mouth, not because the situation amused him, but because he recognized honesty when he heard it. At that exact moment, another associate approached quietly carrying a small sealed evidence bag. Inside rested a tiny silver capsule that reflected the ballroom lights. He handed it to Vincent without saying a word, and the moment Vincent looked at it, I realized Lily's careful observation had changed far more than the course of one birthday celebration. The silver capsule looked impossibly small inside the evidence bag, yet every person standing near it treated it as though it carried the weight of the entire evening. I did not ask what it was. I was almost afraid to know. Vincent studied it for several quiet seconds before handing the sealed bag back to his associate. "Secure it," he said calmly. "Document everything." The man nodded once and disappeared without another word. I had never seen people respond to simple instructions so quickly. No raised voices. No confusion. Just quiet efficiency. It was as though everyone already understood exactly what needed to happen. I suddenly became painfully aware that I had wandered into a world with rules completely different from my own. Vincent turned back toward Lily. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm enough to surprise me. "You were very brave." Lily looked up at him with innocent honesty. "I was just scared you would eat the cake." He smiled faintly. "That is usually how bravery begins." I felt tears threatening the corners of my eyes. Children were rarely taken seriously by strangers, especially wealthy and influential strangers. Yet Vincent had listened to every word my daughter said as though she were the most important witness in the room. He rose to his full height before looking toward me. "Miss Carter, may I ask you a few questions?" "Of course. How long have you worked for this catering company?" "About 14 months. Mostly weekends and private events." "Have you ever met the pastry chef your daughter identified?" I shook my head immediately. "No, I have never seen her before tonight." He watched my face carefully, searching for hesitation that simply was not there. "And your daughter?" "She has never attended one of these events until tonight. My babysitter became ill, so I had no other choice." For a brief moment he remained silent. Then he nodded, almost to himself. "That matches what my team has already confirmed." I blinked in surprise. "Confirmed? We verify information quickly." There was no arrogance in his voice. It sounded more like a simple fact. Before I could respond, another associate approached carrying a slim black tablet. Vincent glanced at the screen for only a few seconds before handing it back. "Your employment records, apartment lease, and financial history are consistent. There is nothing connecting you or Lily to anyone involved in this evening." I stared at him in disbelief. Part of me should have felt offended that strangers had examined my life so thoroughly. Instead, I felt oddly relieved. They knew the truth. We were exactly who we appeared to be. An overworked single mother and an observant little girl who had simply been in the wrong place at the right time. Vincent folded his hands behind his back and looked through the enormous windows toward the glittering Manhattan skyline. "Most people notice what is loud," he said quietly. "Very few notice what is out of place." He looked back at Lily. "Your daughter noticed both." Lily shyly hugged her stuffed rabbit closer to her chest. "My teacher says paying attention helps people." His smile became a little more genuine. "Your teacher sounds wise." For the first time since the evening began, my heartbeat slowed. Perhaps everything would simply end here. The investigation would continue, the guests would return home, and Lily and I would go back to our tiny apartment where tomorrow would bring school, bills, and another double shift. I wanted that ordinary life more than anything. But as I reached for my serving tray, I noticed one member of Vincent's security team speaking urgently into an earpiece while scanning the ballroom entrance. His calm expression hardened almost imperceptibly before his eyes found Vincent. Nothing was said aloud, yet Vincent understood immediately. Whatever had just been discovered had nothing to do with the birthday cake anymore. Somehow, it had become about us. The change in the room was so subtle that most people never noticed it. The guests continued sipping coffee and discussing business deals. Soft music drifted through the ballroom once again. Waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying dessert trays that suddenly looked strangely unimportant. Only the people standing closest to Vincent understood that something had shifted. His security team no longer watched the crowd casually. Their eyes moved with quiet precision, studying every entrance, every hallway, every unfamiliar face. Vincent listened as the guard murmured a few sentences into his ear. He did not interrupt. He simply nodded once before looking directly at me. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice calm enough to keep Lily from becoming frightened. "I need to ask you to remain here for a little while longer." My stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" He answered honestly. I believe someone realized your daughter saw more than they expected. A cold wave traveled through my chest. I instinctively wrapped one arm around Lily, pulling her close enough that I could feel her heartbeat against mine. You mean the pastry chef? Vincent's eyes remained steady. She left the hotel less than 3 minutes after your daughter spoke. Unfortunately, she was not alone. My mouth suddenly felt dry. We did not do anything except tell the truth. I know, he replied quietly. Unfortunately, truth has a way of making certain people uncomfortable. Lily looked up at me with wide eyes. Mom, are we in trouble? Before I could answer, Vincent knelt beside her once again. No, sweetheart. You are not in trouble. You help people by paying attention. She searched his face for several seconds before giving a tiny nod. Children seemed to know when adults were pretending. For some reason, she believed him completely. One of the security officers approached, carrying a small tablet displaying the hotel's security cameras. Vincent motioned for me to look. The screen showed Lily running toward the birthday cake only minutes earlier. Another camera captured the pastry chef leaving through a service hallway moments after the celebration stopped. Then a third camera showed something I had completely missed. A man wearing a gray maintenance uniform had watched Lily from the opposite side of the ballroom immediately after she pointed toward the cake. He never approached us. He never spoke. He simply watched before quietly walking toward a restricted exit. Who is that? I whispered. He does not work for the hotel, Vincent answered. We already confirmed that. My knees suddenly felt weak. I sat down in the nearest chair before I lost my balance completely. Everything that had seemed like an embarrassing misunderstanding only half an hour earlier now felt terrifyingly real. Lily climbed onto my lap and hugged her stuffed rabbit so tightly that one of its floppy ears folded beneath her arm. I want to go home, she whispered. I kissed the top of her head. I know, baby. So do I. Vincent remained silent for a long moment before speaking again. Ordinarily, I would agree. He glanced once toward the ballroom entrance where 2 members of his security team had quietly repositioned themselves. Tonight, I cannot recommend that. I looked at him in disbelief. What do you mean? If someone believes Lily can identify people connected to what happened this evening, your apartment is the first place they would expect you to return. The words settled over me like heavy rain. My tiny apartment had always been my safe place. It was where Lily kept her school drawings on the refrigerator with colorful magnets. It was where we celebrated birthdays with grocery store cupcakes because homemade cakes were cheaper. It was home. The idea that it might no longer be safe felt impossible to accept. Vincent studied my face with surprising compassion before quietly making a decision that would change both of our lives. Until we understand exactly who is involved, he said, I would like you and Lily to remain under my protection. My first instinct was to refuse. Every lesson life had taught me warned against accepting help from powerful strangers, no matter how kind they sounded. I had spent years building a life where every dollar was earned honestly, every decision was mine to make, and every problem was solved one exhausting shift at a time. Looking at Vincent DeLuca, I could not deny that his world was built very differently from mine. That is generous, I said carefully, but I think Lily and I would rather go home. He did not argue. He simply looked at me with an expression that reminded me of an emergency room doctor who had already seen the test results before speaking to the family. If I believed your apartment was safe tonight, I would personally have one of my drivers take you there. His words carried no pressure, only certainty. I do not. Before I could answer, one of the security officers approached holding a small backpack. Miss Carter, he said respectfully. Our team recovered this outside the employee entrance. My heart skipped. It was Lily's pink backpack with tiny yellow stars across the front. She had left it in the employee lounge earlier that evening. I frowned. How did it get outside? The guard shook his head. Nobody on the hotel staff moved it. Lily looked up at me in confusion. I forgot it by the chair. Vincent's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Someone expected you to leave through the employee exit. The simple sentence sent a chill down my spine. Until that moment, I had assumed everything happening was coincidence. Now it felt personal. Someone had watched us closely enough to know where my daughter had left her belongings. I hugged Lily tighter without realizing how firmly I was holding her. Mom, she whispered gently, you are squeezing me. I immediately loosened my arms and kissed her forehead. I am sorry, sweetheart. Vincent turned toward one of his associates. Have another vehicle brought to the private entrance. The man nodded and quietly disappeared. I noticed there was no frantic rushing, no raised voices, no dramatic orders. Everyone simply understood their role. It was calm, disciplined, almost invisible. A few minutes later, Vincent looked back at Lily. "Do you like hot chocolate?" She blinked, surprised by the unexpected question. "With marshmallows? If that is your preference." She gave the smallest smile I had seen all evening. "Yes." Vincent glanced toward one of the hotel managers. "Please have a fresh cup prepared." I watched the exchange in disbelief. Moments earlier we had been discussing security concerns, yet somehow he understood that a frightened 7-year-old needed something familiar more than another serious conversation. When the steaming mug arrived, Lily wrapped both hands around it and sighed softly, as though the warmth alone made the enormous ballroom feel less frightening. Vincent waited until she had taken her first sip before speaking to me again. "Fear causes people to make rush decisions. I would rather you decide after your daughter feels safe." His words settled into my thoughts more deeply than I expected. He was not trying to control us. He was giving me room to think clearly. I looked through the towering windows at the Manhattan skyline glittering beneath the night sky. Somewhere beyond those lights was our tiny apartment, our secondhand sofa, Lily's school backpack, unpaid bills waiting on the kitchen counter, and the ordinary life I desperately wanted to protect. Then I looked back at my daughter, quietly sipping hot chocolate, while two complete strangers stood watch without making her feel watched. For the first time that night, I asked myself a question I never imagined asking. Maybe the safest place for us was not the place we called home. Maybe, just for tonight, it was standing beside the man whose life my little girl had unknowingly changed forever. I finally nodded. It was the hardest simple decision I had ever made. "Just for tonight," I said quietly. "Tomorrow morning, Lily and I go home if everything is all right." Vincent inclined his head with the smallest hint of relief. "That is fair." There was something unexpectedly reassuring about the fact that he did not try to negotiate. He accepted my condition exactly as I had stated it. Within minutes, the ballroom began returning to its elegant rhythm. Guests who had never learned the real reason for the delay resumed their conversations, believing the evening had simply experienced an unexpected technical problem. The magnificent birthday cake had quietly disappeared, replaced by individual desserts prepared by another bakery. The celebration continued, but the atmosphere felt different to me. Once you notice how fragile normal life can be, it never quite looks the same again. Lily had finished her hot chocolate by the time one of Vincent's associates approached and quietly announced that the vehicle was ready. Vincent turned toward me. "We will leave through the private entrance." I expected a dramatic convoy or flashing lights. Instead, everything happened with remarkable discretion. We were guided through softly lit service corridors where hotel employees smiled politely without asking questions. The elevator descended in complete silence except for the quiet hum of its motor. Lily reached for my hand with one hand while holding her stuffed rabbit with the other. "Mom," she whispered, "are we going to be okay?" I looked down at her innocent face and wished I possessed the certainty children always believe their parents had. "Yes," I answered softly. "We are together. That is what matters." When the elevator doors opened, cool evening air drifted inside, carrying the familiar sounds of Manhattan at night. A black luxury sport utility vehicle waited beneath a covered entrance, its engine running quietly. Another identical vehicle stood several yards behind it. The drivers remained beside their doors, calm and patient, blending into the shadows more than standing out. Vincent opened the rear passenger door himself. "After you." I hesitated for only a second before helping Lily climb inside. The seats were soft cream leather, and a folded blanket rested neatly beside a small basket filled with bottled water, fruit, and children's coloring books. Lily's eyes widened. "There are crayons." Vincent noticed her surprise. "One of my assistants has grandchildren," he explained. "She believes every vehicle should be prepared for unexpected young passengers." Lily smiled for the first time since she had run across the ballroom. It was a genuine smile, small but real, and watching it eased something inside my chest that had been painfully tight all evening. As the vehicle pulled away from the hotel, I looked back through the tinted window. The Grand Lexington glowed against the Manhattan skyline as though nothing unusual had happened there at all. No one driving past would ever guess how one little girl had changed the course of an ordinary birthday celebration. We traveled several blocks in peaceful silence before Vincent, seated across from us, finally spoke. "There is something I have wanted to ask you." I looked up. "What is it?" His attention rested on Lily rather than me. Has she always noticed details this way? I smiled faintly despite everything. Ever since she could talk. She remembers faces after seeing them once. She notices when neighbors change flower pots outside their apartments. She once found my wedding ring 3 weeks after I lost it because she remembered hearing it bounce beneath the washing machine. Vincent nodded thoughtfully. That is not ordinary observation. No, I admitted. It is simply who she is. He remained quiet for another moment before looking out the window at the city lights sliding past. Then tonight was never about luck, he said softly. It was about a little girl choosing to speak when every adult around her stayed silent. Lily leaned against my shoulder, already beginning to grow sleepy, completely unaware that her quiet courage had earned something far greater than gratitude. It had earned the unwavering attention of a man who never forgot the people who changed his life. The estate was quieter than I expected. Instead of towering gates surrounded by intimidating displays of wealth, the first thing I noticed was the sound of water flowing from a small stone fountain in the center of the circular driveway. Warm lights glowed from the windows, giving the house the feeling of a family home rather than a fortress. The vehicle rolled to a gentle stop beneath the covered entrance, and before I could reach for the door handle, it was already being opened. A woman in her early 60s stepped forward with kind blue eyes and silver hair neatly tied back. "Welcome," she said with a gentle smile that immediately reminded me of my elementary school librarian. "I am Margaret. I help manage the house." She looked directly at Lily. "You must be exhausted, sweetheart." Lily nodded sleepily while rubbing one eye. Margaret crouched just enough to meet her gaze. "I made chocolate chip cookies earlier today. Would you like one with a glass of milk before bed?" Lily looked at me for permission. I smiled for the first time in what felt like days. "1 cookie." Margaret pretended to whisper. "That is exactly the number I was hoping you would say." Lily giggled softly. The sound echoed through the entrance hall, bright and innocent, and somehow made the entire house feel warmer. Vincent watched the exchange without interrupting. "Margaret has been with my family for many years," he said quietly. "If she says you are safe, you are safe." Those words carried more comfort than any security system possibly could. Inside, the house surprised me again. There were bookshelves instead of trophies, family photographs instead of oversized portraits. Fresh flowers rested on tables beside reading lamps. It looked lived in, cared for, real. Margaret led Lily toward the kitchen while I remained in the foyer with Vincent. Neither of us spoke immediately. Through the open doorway, I could hear Lily laughing softly as Margaret searched for the largest chocolate chip cookie in the jar. Vincent finally broke the silence. "I owe your daughter more than thanks." I shook my head. "She only did what any child would have done." He looked at me with quiet certainty. "No, most children would have stayed silent because they were afraid adults would not believe them." I thought back to the moment Lily ran across the ballroom despite hundreds of strangers staring at her. He was right. Courage had looked very small tonight. It had worn a blue cardigan and carried a stuffed rabbit. Vincent reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small brass key attached to a simple wooden keychain. There was nothing expensive or decorative about it. He placed it gently into my hand. "This opens the guest cottage on the east side of the property. Stay there as long as you need. No rent. No conditions. Leave whenever you decide you are comfortable." I stared at the key resting in my palm. "Why would you do this for people you met only a few hours ago?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because your daughter protected someone she did not know. The least I can do is protect the 2 people who gave me that chance." Tears blurred my vision before I realized they were falling. For years I had believed strength meant carrying every burden alone. That night a 7-year-old girl taught me something different. Sometimes real strength is finding the courage to speak. Sometimes real power is choosing kindness when you have every reason not to. As Margaret walked back into the foyer holding Lily's sleepy hand, my daughter looked up at Vincent with the sincerity only children possess. "Next year," she said softly, "I hope your birthday cake is boring." Vincent laughed, a genuine laugh that transformed his usually reserved face. "So do I, Lily." Looking back now, I still think about that simple wish. Because the happiest celebrations are not remembered for surprises. They are remembered because everyone made it safely to the table together. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that changes every life forever.